interesting play and help customers, especially enterprise customers, move into the cloud. You know, we're working with hundreds of enterprise customers every day around the world in every vertical, from technology-driven businesses to 100-year-old manufacturing companies, to banking and financials, transportation, healthcare, retail, media, government. You know, and this is a topic that is driving discussions across the board. Even today's webinar, I think we have, looking at the number of attendees, probably about 3 times as many people joining this webinar today than we see on other webinar topics. So thank you very much for joining. We have a really strong panel for today's discussion. I'm Rod Stellmuller, and I'm joined by 2 of my colleagues from Aviatrix and Hashicorp. Abhishek Bhatt is one of our principal solution architects. He's a real hands-on guy who leads our product management around our Terraform repo and infrastructure as code efforts. And I promise he's a much nicer guy than he looks like in his picture. Justin Lin is a senior solutions engineer at Hashicorp, and Abhishek and I have had the pleasure to work with Jason over the last month or so on this webinar, and he brings a great perspective on why the partnership between Aviatrix and Hashicorp is both immensely useful and timely for enterprise IT teams moving to the cloud. And then finally, I'd like to welcome Justin Donahue, who is the founder and CTO of Observian. I met Justin recently through a banking customer engagement that we had. Observian is a really hands-on consulting company who helps customers in every aspect of IT infrastructure, but specifically is focused on transformation to the cloud. Justin's background, he's a DevOps guy and has primarily focused on infrastructure as code from an application perspective, but he's seen firsthand the challenges of cloud networking problems and challenges. So I'm excited to have Justin on with us to join and bring that perspective to the discussion. Logistically, I just want to mention one thing. You'll see that there is a Q&A panel. So during the webinar, if you have questions, please use the Q&A panel rather than the chat panel. And we have some people who are manning this for questions, and we'll try to get to your questions as we go along. And then we'll bring up some of those questions to everyone as we get to the end of the webinar for the Q&A session. You know, the goal today is really to help you understand how the strong partnership between Aviatrix and HashiCorp is going to benefit you, our customers and our partners out there. So we want to make this really beneficial for you. Later in the webinar, we'll be doing a combined demo, but as you know, the infrastructure as code is all about automation. Being able to kick off a complex automated process, speed infrastructure provisioning and ongoing operations. So just to start, let me quickly turn it over to Abhishek and have him actually kick off an automated network infrastructure provisioning process that we'll come back to in the demo, but while we're doing the first part of the webinar, this will be going on in the background and we'll see the result of it. Abhishek, you want to switch over to that? And we'll...
Yeah, thanks, Rod. So what I want to show you guys right here is the Aviatrix Copilot Topology Manager. And what you're seeing here is a simple transit topology built using the Aviatrix platform. On the left is a AWS footprint that is connected to a Azure footprint on the right with a transit connectivity between those 2 footprints. What we're going to do right now is kick off a workflow, and then as Rod mentioned, we'll come back to it and actually get into the details of what the workflow achieved. So right now, all you guys are going to see is me committing some code changes in a Git repo.
Oh, well, that was simple enough. Thanks, Abhishek. You guys will come back now and you'll see the difference on that topology map that we were showing, where the different infrastructure that got spun up will be visible, and then we'll show you kind of how we did that and where all these things are. So, let's come back now and look at some of the challenges that we hear about every day. First, enterprise networking teams are being challenged to bring mission critical infrastructure to the cloud, and to do this while maintaining the simplicity, speed, and agility that the application teams have come to expect in cloud environments. To do this, networking teams are looking to embrace infrastructure as code and the same automation principles their application and DevOps counterparts have been using for years. It's mutually beneficial effort so that we're actually leveraging the expertise both of the application development team and the network infrastructure team. So these two things come together and we can actually do some very interesting things in the cloud that maybe weren't really possible on premise. Now, application development teams are used to automation, source code control, rapid regression testing, automated deployment. It's really part of their DNA. But digital transformation and the move to the cloud has made perfect sense for them, especially for application environments, with limited requirements, maybe for some simple networking between workloads, workload connectivity, maybe some internet connectivity, and simple security and access controls to those application environments. This was pretty easy for anybody to spin up and do based on the native network constructs in the cloud as we're spinning things up. In fact, the DevOps teams were really considered the speedboats in IT, right? Where traditionally viewed networking teams as slow, not using the automation tools and the modern processes for provisioning and maintenance, the infrastructure as code, if you will. In many cases, this was very true, right? Networking expertise often comes from the physical data center where the processes were manual and slow, and that's all really in the past. We have a whole new environment now. Originally, the DevOps teams, kind of broke away from enterprise IT, and for good reason, right? They formed skunkworks, fast-moving shadow IT, just to get it done fast. And this was perfect for dev and test environments. And they really delivered the proof that applications could and should be run in the cloud. But arguably, there was no real enterprise architecture, no security and compliance, or the ability to do real day two operations, which enterprise IT needs. As the cloud environments grew, they expanded to multiple regions, to multiple clouds, and interconnection became a real requirement. Enterprises needed to segment for regulatory or corporate compliance policy, and this responsibility to get control was pushed back to the enterprise IT. But what enterprise IT found was that what had been created was kind of chaotic in the cloud. It leveraged only the basic network services that were offered by the cloud providers, with none of the visibility and control that IT needs really to leverage that to be able to deliver these fast-moving application environments and things that the business actually needed from IT. So now with mainstream enterprise transformation to cloud, everything has changed. Nobody, including the network teams, want to go back to the way things were done in the data center. Everyone wants the speed and agility, the simplicity and automation that cloud infrastructure provides, but enterprise IT needs to bring the visibility and control that is required to operate a complex, multi-account, multi-region, multi-cloud enterprise network made up of tens or hundreds of interdependent application environments. So this was one of the first challenges. Let me just start with Justin from Observian. Are you seeing this kind of thing with your customers?
Yeah, 100%. So I've been doing cloud for about 10 years. And when I got started, we didn't even have VPCs. And then as it started to evolve, I got into doing like multi-regional networking pre-transit gateway. And we were doing, a lot of this heavy lifting by hand. And now that we're an advanced AWS partner and a premier Google partner, a lot of our, first engagements start out with talking about like an enterprise application stack. And at the foundation, like before you can do anything, is the network. And I'm seeing this like skills gap is what we'll call it, where you've already got to teach them how to do native networking, but the tooling inside, let's just pick on AWS, is kind of atrocious when it comes to networking. You can't visualize it. There's not a lot of control. And so I'm seeing some of our networking teams at customers starting to try to do things like Terraform, and they're trying to do infrastructure as code, and they're deploying like virtual palos and whatnot. But at the end of the day, a lot of them are still driving in the console because they're used to like PAN. And so the customer that you referenced where you and I first started interacting with each other, their whole ecosystem is on-prem with Palo because they're a bank and they're just venturing out into the cloud, and they've got this great enterprise network. But as soon as you start talking cloud, it starts to fall apart. And once they started seeing the Aviatrix, it kind of was that missing piece of the puzzle, and it kind of accelerated their adoption. That's kind of a long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, Justin. It's great to hear the perspective. And for those of you who noticed, we switched screens there for a second. Abhishek told me he needed to jump over and actually approve something in the process. So there's approval in the process, right? So Justin, Lynn from Hashicorp, are you seeing this kind of challenge, with customers as you're talking to them?
Yeah, I definitely am. It's funny, I've been with Hashicorp for 1.5 years now, and it's kind of, I think most organizations started on the infrastructure as code journey with other teams, right, with systems teams, and they thought that they would, that was the kind of smart place to get that benefit. And so DevOps people really focused on that. Over the past 1.5 years, I've really seen a lot of networking teams come around to infrastructure as code and realize those same benefits. Now I'm seeing a lot of them, try to operationalize that and try to take it to the next level and adopt some of the things that we're going to talk about in this demo, around modules and offering self-service to the populations that they serve, and kind of wrapping governance and compliance around the things that they're provisioning and those kind of things. So I've definitely seen the transition and seen some of these DevOps practices filtering down into networking groups.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and that really covers, I think, Justin, you talked about the skills gap that people have out there in terms of being able to move to multi-cloud. I think even cloud in general, right? You have to have that expertise in networking, in networking and in cloud infrastructure, and each cloud is a little bit different. So that challenge gets extended as you have to do multiple things. So this is one of the things that I think we really see as a benefit of our partnership, is being able to help customers from that perspective. And I guess the last challenge that I have here that we can talk about a little bit, but I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of disagreement from anybody, is human error, right? Network downtime reports every year are consistently showing that human error is kind of 60% of the reason that we have network downtimes. And this is something that technology companies have been trying to solve for decades, ever since I've been in networking, for sure. But the bottom line is, it's not just technology, it's people, right? There needs to be broad adoption of automated infrastructure testing, full cycle infrastructure as code, continuous development and test automation. All of this needs to be applied to infrastructure. And maybe that was really difficult, right, in the physical world, where you didn't have some of the capabilities that you have in sort of software-defined infrastructure. But now we need to be able to bring this DevOps, CI/CD automation process to networking, and so that we can do all of these same processes and automate the deployments in a manner that we can ensure that human error isn't going to be a leading cause of network downtime. And so I think this is really important. So I assume no argument from anybody on that challenge.
One of the things that I would call out, though, that I like about the Aviatrix console, so like when I'm doing, a POC or even a production deployment with customers and we're terraforming out the network, there's a lot of times where people can't resist the urge to create Terraform drift by going in and like adding a random CIDR block to make something work. The nice thing about Aviatrix is the changes that you make, because they have a Terraform provider, you can actually export to Terraform. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds, something that we haven't seen in AWS before. So it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. And people can export that Terraform and then include it into the next round of of the CI/CD pipeline. So that's fantastic point. So let's talk about a little bit of why, right? You know, why did Hashicorp and Aviatrix come together in this? And hopefully, based on those challenges, that's pretty clear, because we're really going after solving those challenges. But I think at a high level, you know, we're both really modern cloud infrastructure. Hashicorp is bringing enterprise class infrastructure automation and all of the processes around doing that. And Aviatrix is bringing enterprise class cloud networking and security infrastructure. So combining those two things, I think, is really going to be what allows customers to get what they really want in the future of networking as they move to the cloud. The other thing is that we're both multi-cloud. We're both focused on the ability to do this independent of an individual cloud infrastructure, right? We want to reduce the learning curve. You know, single cloud was painful. We want to be able to make multi-cloud actually not even as painful as single cloud. We want to be able to create repeatable designs, make it easy to deploy, and do that through a cloud networking platform that abstracts the complexities and really promotes an API that goes across a multi-cloud environment. Really, it makes it a reality. We can run this on top of the native cloud networking constructs across all the clouds that your enterprise gets embedded in. And then the final thing is the power of centralized intelligence. You know, we need this to guarantee the correctness, to reduce the human error. You know, our Aviatrix controller has knowledge across the entire multi-cloud environment that isn't available anywhere else in even a single cloud environment, but certainly not across multi-clouds. And then the entire system that HashiCorp is based on looks at things from a centralized point of view, puts in the security policies, and makes sure that things get rolled out in the proper order and are not conflicting with each other, and makes it so that we can really eliminate that human error that we were talking about. Now, does this, Justin from HashiCorp, we have two Justins here. I thought about calling you guys Thing 1 and Thing 2, but we'll stick with Justin 1 and Justin 2. You know, does that ring true from a HashiCorp standpoint in terms of why we're partnered together?
Yeah, it really does. I think, you know, both companies kind of take a multi-cloud approach, right? Terraform allows you to deploy infrastructure to any you know, other tool that has what's called a provider, and I'll get into more about what that means. And Aviatrix has taken a really unique approach with their provider due to the nature of their service. It's kind of a multi-cloud service, and so their provider is a multi-cloud. So yeah, Brad, I agree with everything you've said. I think it's a great kind of natural partnership.
Okay, great. So how about Justin from Observient? Justin, you know, you mentioned a little bit about when you first discovered us, but is this something that you saw the need for even before you knew there was a solution to it, and now you know there is a solution?
Especially going into multi-cloud, yes. So I've always been dissatisfied with the level of network visibility that cloud providers have, but there's only so many hours in the day. I can't, you know, write my own tool all the time. But when I saw Aviatrix, I was excited from just, you know, a single cloud perspective. And then when you guys started getting more into the multi-cloud, because more and more of my customers are asking me to do more than just, you know, a single provider, and the ability to abstract away, you know, trying to level up one cloud is pretty hard. People on my team, we do 2 clouds per person, and it's a full-time job. So to expect, you know, somebody who's like your enterprise network admin, keeping your colo, your site to sites up, your corporate network, and now 2 clouds, yes, it's not going to happen. So yeah, 100%.
Great. Yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, I'm sure that this is ringing true for many of the folks on the webinar today. So let's step back for just a second. For those of you who are not really familiar with Aviatrix and Aviatrix Cloud Network Platform, and we'll talk just a little bit about what Aviatrix is and what we do. And then, you know, while we believe most of you really understand, you know, what Terraform is, let's extend your knowledge on that and have Justin highlight some of the great features that Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise bring to the table that maybe you're not familiar with. And then once we do that, we'll jump back into the demo. We'll see if what we fired off earlier actually is up and running, and then show you a little bit deeper into the weeds. So, just really quickly about Aviatrix, you may not be familiar with us. We have over 400 customers, as I mentioned, in almost every vertical out there. So we've got a lot of experience with customers moving into the cloud, both big and small enterprises. Our platform, the Aviatrix Cloud Network Platform, it's not a SaaS, it's not a managed service. This is software that you actually run on your instances in multi-cloud environments. The main piece of this is the controller. The controller you can think of as the brain of the operations. It can be launched in any cloud environment and then be utilized across multiple cloud environments. And it's talking to our own gateway services that actually are instances running in the cloud that provide advanced networking and advanced security services, and also all of the telemetry necessary to do the operational visibility that we'll talk about. But we also talk directly to the APIs of each one of the cloud providers. So this is how we create that abstraction layer that allows you to develop Terraform code that is going to operate across multiple clouds, because we will deal with the underlying connection to the APIs for each one of the unique complexities of each one of the clouds, but we'll do that through an abstracted Terraform API. And then all of this feeds into the visibility and the operational tools that come along with this. Now, just to give you a visual of how this sort of builds out, this can start in a single cloud. You can even start in just a single region of a cloud and then expand to multiple regions. And you start seeing, as soon as you move to a different region, that we're creating this repeatable design. And that repeatable design can get extended into multiple clouds. So now you create the foundation of a multi-cloud network architecture, which is actually the backbone or the transit layer of the cloud network. Now, to that transit layer, you can do things like add high performance encryption, where inside the cloud we can encrypt up to 75 gig of IPsec encryption. We can give you full line rate encryption across, say, your direct connect to AWS or your express route into Azure. We can do service insertion and service chaining. This is where you can bring in next generation firewalls or add SD-WAN connectivity into connecting onto this transit backbone. We can also support cloud native environments. So if you already have, for instance, an AWS transit gateway running and you want to connect that to the backbone, you can do that. And what we find is a lot of our customers who have started that way will move to the Aviatrix transit because of the visibility and the capabilities that it provides. Then finally, you can do things like bring remote access connectivity for users and branch offices. You can have secure ingress and egress to the internet, whether that's distributed into each one of your VPCs or VNets, or going through a centralized location where you might run a next generation firewall, as I mentioned. And then finally, all of the telemetry that actually allows you to have the visibility that's completely missing from the native cloud networking capabilities, as Justin was mentioning just a moment ago. So in addition to that, we've been talking about the Terraform single provider. So basically what this is a single provider. Instead of having you to use the Terraform provider from AWS and from Azure and from Google, we actually build that into our single provider and allow you to actually abstract all of that complexity so that it's through one provider. And that provider does both the native constructs in each one of those clouds, but also the Aviatrix infrastructure that's supplied, and then all of the networking and security connectivity and configuration of routing tables and so forth that goes along for your multi-cloud infrastructure. Another thing that was mentioned by Justin, and this kind of gets you the idea, anything that's done through our console can be exported into Terraform code, so you have the basis for how to build that and be able to create repeatable modules that you can deploy through your CI/CD workflow. I wanted to just show a couple of pictures of the day 2 operations, because that was sort of day 1, how are you deploying it? But we have the ability to deploy a dynamic topology mapping. And this is something that you saw at the very beginning of the demo and we'll come back to. But this happens, we can see for multiple clouds, all of the constructs of networking across the different clouds. And then finally, we can drill in with what we call Flow IQ to get intelligent traffic flow analytics, to do troubleshooting and drill down into any of the conversations that are going on and see exactly what IP address and port protocols and so forth are being used as you troubleshoot issues there. So now I'm going to turn it over real quickly to Justin and have Justin walk through a couple of the exciting new capabilities that Hashicorp brings.
Thanks so much, Rod. Yeah, I just have a few slides. And before I jump into Terraform, I just wanted to talk about Hashicorp, our company, a little bit. I find a lot of people have heard of some of our individual tools, but some people don't know that, Hashicorp is an actual company. So we're founded in 2012, and all of our tools are focused on helping organizations navigate changes that we've seen in IT, moving from a really static data center that they controlled and kind of controlled access in and out of, to a dynamic hybrid world like we've been talking about throughout this entire webinar. And so we have 6 different tools. You can see them off to the right of this slide. They're all open source tools. And then the bottom 4, we have enterprise offerings for where we offer extra features around collaboration and security and governance and those kind of things, as well as support. And so our software stack enables provisioning, securing, connecting, and running apps and infrastructure that support them. So Rod, if you can go ahead and jump to the next slide, we'll jump into Terraform a little bit. Most of the people on the call are probably familiar with Terraform, but Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool. It allows us to describe our infrastructure as kind of a codified configuration. And then we can deploy it using a common workflow, no matter where we're deploying that infrastructure to. So there's a huge open source community around Terraform. And Terraform has the concept of a provider. You can see in this slide, there's over 200 providers. The providers, I think of them like a bridge to an API, right? They're what allow us to provision anywhere, whether it's the cloud vendors like AWS and Azure, like we did in the demo, or it's other software tools like Aviatrix. There's over 200 providers, which again allows Terraform to kind of deploy that infrastructure to a wide variety of places. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. Terraform, kind of the guiding principle of it is infrastructure as code. And as we get into the demo, we'll talk more about this, but infrastructure as code brings a whole lot of benefits to our organization. And software developers have kind of been realizing these benefits for many years, and our infrastructure and our networking teams are now able to realize them. So we've talked about reducing human error, right? Reducing failed builds, having a self-documenting history of what we've done. If we're writing our code in a version control repository and we're doing proper things like committing that code and merging between branches, we're able to have a self-documenting history of what we've done. And we're also able to roll back changes quickly if issues are experienced for whatever reason. We're also able to build branching strategies, and this is what Abhishek and I will show in the demo. We're able to build branching strategies similar to what developers are using. So maybe we have 3 different branches. We have a development, a stage, and a production branch that represent our different environments. And we're able to promote a configuration through those branches to ensure that we have similar environments across those different, similar infrastructure across those different environments. The last slide describes, I'm sorry, one more slide. So Terraform ends up being like a single control plane for cloud provisioning, no matter where we're provisioning to, right? Whether it's a public cloud, it's our private data center, it's a third-party, software as a service, or a third-party application, or some other business applications. And Terraform comes in different configurations. So if you flip to the next slide, that describes the configurations. I mentioned before, Terraform's an open source tool. You can download it from our website and run it via the command line. And then you can kind of move into different phases as you move up with organizational complexity and challenges. Terraform Cloud is a software as a service offering. There's a free version that allows groups to work together. So if I have infrastructure and I'm sharing with Rod or Abhishek, we can form a team on Terraform Cloud and share our state files and our variables and our infrastructure. And then there's paid policy sets around Terraform Cloud as well, things that focus on self-service and collaboration and policy and governance. That Terraform Cloud with paid feature set is the version that we're using for the demo today. And then finally, there's Terraform Enterprise, which allows typically larger organizations to deploy their own instance of Terraform, manage it within their infrastructure, and kind of control and run it themselves. So those are just a few quick slides that describe Hashicorp and Terraform. Back to you, Rob.
All right, fantastic. And now we're going to jump back to the demo. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, right? The demo on a live demo on a webinar. Okay, so we're going to get to that. But I guess one of the things I want you guys to hit on, as you go through this demo is, why build automation for network infrastructure, right? I mean, it seems obvious, but maybe you'll hit some of the reasons why we can actually get some real benefit when we start automating network infrastructure deployments.
Right. So that's a question that comes up quite often, and customers ask why build automation. You're potentially spinning up network infrastructure, shared infrastructure once and not doing it again. So customers tend to ask what drives build automation, the need for build automation, and the key there is to understand how infrastructure as code obviously works, and how those processes can help you on an ongoing basis, not just in the build phase. So for example, in the traditional physical world, network teams would take great pains to set up replica environments of the production network to do testing and validation. Translate that to the cloud and infrastructure as code, and the build automation can be leveraged to set up these sandboxes that allow you to test and validate changes before they get pushed out to a production network. That is key in minimizing human error causing outages. So the workflow that we triggered right at the beginning, all we saw then was me committing a change to a Git repository, and this essentially added a Aviatrix transit footprint in a new AWS region. So like I showed you guys, this was the footprint we started with, which is essentially a AWS region connected to an Azure region. And now, as I refresh this, you can see that the workflow that kicked off actually built a new transit in a new AWS region and actually connected that to my existing network. So this is what extends your transit network into a new region, and now your application teams are ready to spin up their VPCs and attach to this transit network. And keep in mind, these transit pairings that you see bring with them intelligent routing, which means these VPCs and VNets across regions can now talk to each other, and you have fine-grained control on things like NATing, route filtering, etc. So this additional footprint, network footprint, was spun up simply by committing new code into a Git repository. And this essentially is the basis of infrastructure as code, which means you're driving your infrastructure completely as code, which is hosted in version control. And so I want to talk about the actual process that happened here, triggered by the Git commit. And Justin will actually explain to us how Terraform Cloud helps teams to support this process. So from a version control perspective, the code change was checked in. What we can see from here is that code check-in automatically triggered the deployment workflow in Terraform Cloud. And it went through the different stages. You can see the typical Terraform workflow of doing a Terraform plan. The additional capability here is, and Justin will talk about it, is some policy checks that Terraform Cloud supports. This is not supported in the open source version. And then the infrastructure was actually deployed, which is what we just saw on the topology. Justin, you want to talk about the Terraform Cloud features that were leveraged to support this workflow?
Yeah, definitely. So we leveraged a few features with Terraform Cloud here, and if you scroll up a little bit more, Abhishek, and just go ahead and click on the workspaces so that we can get a list of our workspaces here. What you see is 3 different workspaces, and Terraform Cloud has the ability to monitor a version control repository. So we've actually connected each of these workspaces to a repository, the repository you just saw Abhishek in, that has 3 different branches. So we've created a branch structure in our repository, a development branch, a staging branch, and a production branch. Each of those branches is tied to one of these workspaces. So as we do our code, we can write our code in development or even a different branch, and we can do a kind of merge request or a pull request into our development branch or our staging branch, and kind of promote our code through that life cycle as we go. As we do those commits or those pull requests are merged in, these workspaces will automatically kick off and provision the infrastructure that we want to run. So Abhishek, if you click back into that prod workspace, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of what Terraform Cloud brings. This same kind of a run could be done with Terraform open source via the command line, and Terraform open source works out of a directory. We had some questions, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A, but we had some questions about a state file and what that means. A state file is kind of a core tenet of what Terraform does. As Terraform provisions infrastructure, it keeps track of what is provisioned in a state file. And that state file can sometimes have sensitive data in it. And so Terraform Cloud and Enterprise kind of centralize that for us. As you can see what Abhishek is scrolling through here, and they wrap role-based access control around it. Same thing with our sensitive variables. We're deploying to multiple clouds here, and we need credentials to do that. And so Terraform Cloud is able to kind of wrap all that in the concept of a workspace, and again, tie that role-based access control around it. So what we've done is we've written some code in our production or in our master branch here of our repository. We've done a commit. And then if you click back on the runs tab there, we can kind of see what happens. A plan happens. So the way that Terraform sort of works is it looks at your configuration file, it runs a plan, which is a dry run. It tells us what it's going to add, change, or destroy. And then in Terraform open source, it would just go ahead and run an apply. Another feature of Terraform Cloud that we're highlighting here is called Sentinel. It's a policy as code engine that allows us to kind of describe our compliance and governance guardrails up front. And it happens between the plan and apply. So it is a proactive enforcement of our compliance policies. And so we've described a few different compliance policies here, things ranging from restrict the instance type. So let us do certain instance sizes. Don't let us do, like a compute instance that's going to cost astronomical amounts of money. Other possibilities are things like change windows. So you'll see we had an advisory failed here for our change window hour. We actually have a change window defined via our Sentinel policy, and Terraform, before it goes and builds that infrastructure, it's checking that if we're in a change window or not. We have this one set to an enforcement of advisory. Sentinel has a few different enforcement levels. And so all this one really does is creates a log file and lets us know that we are out of a change window. But in a realistic world, we might set that to a mandatory enforcement to where it's, if we're outside of a change window, we're not able to modify our production workspace. The final feature of Terraform Cloud that I wanted to cover is the private module registry. Terraform has the concept of modules. It's really just a reusable chunk of Terraform code. And with Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise, we're given the private module registry, which allows us to customize our modules and create versions of them. And so Abhishek and I work together, to kind of publish this module in our private module registry. And with that, we can offer self-service to other groups within our organization. So within this interface, we're given a nice README file to tell us kind of how to use that module. But think of the modules and as the private module registry as a way to offer self-service to other groups within the organization of the infrastructure that you've codified via Terraform. So they're, again, reusable chunks of Terraform code.
Right, and that actually plays really well with the Aviatrix philosophy of repeatable cloud agnostic network architecture as well. So you can build your solutions in the cloud as repeatable modules and then deploy the same module irrespective of which cloud that infrastructure is being deployed in. One last comment on the infrastructure as code, because that truly is the power of infrastructure as code practices adopted by an entire organization. So what Justin spoke about was leveraging Terraform workspaces and mapping them to separate Git branches. This allows independent development. So for instance, a QA team can take code developed by a cloud team and actually run their tests, validations, and then promote that code into a production branch. And that merge of the code actually triggers the workflow, which means once you are sure all the testing has passed, you promote your code to a production branch. And as soon as you do that, that code gets actually deployed out to the network. And that, for me, is the true power of infrastructure as code.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. I promise I'll never doubt that a demo on a webinar that I'm involved with you is not going to work, especially if I guess you've gone through testing it all many, many times, and now you're just deploying it again. So this is exactly what we want to see happen in enterprise networks, being able to be able to do these kinds of things. Now, before we get into the Q&A, Justin from Observian, I wanted to ask you, any final thoughts? I know you're familiar with most of what was shown today, but anything you think from your experience the folks on the webinar should be thinking about?
I mean, we partner with both Hashicorp and Aviatrix for a reason. I feel like if you're going to do the cloud, the sooner you start doing infrastructure as code, the better. Like, it's one of the things you're not going to regret doing. And then as far as like the Aviatrix part of the equation, I think there's a lot of benefit of having it early on, especially as you're learning all these new skill sets and trying to really trace and visualize what the network looks like. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles people come into. And then you start plugging in, multiple regions or multiple accounts or multiple clouds. Now we're dealing with projects, subscriptions, accounts, and it gets pretty overwhelming for the networking, especially when you're traversing multiple clouds. So it's one of those things where it's like the sooner you get it involved, the better. You're not going to regret it. It's one of those things that's going to help you. It's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, what we say all the time is we want to deliver the simplicity and the automation that everybody expects from cloud, but also provide the visibility and control that the enterprise IT guys need, as this transformation to cloud happens. And as you suggest, it's really something that's great to get started with kind of early on, as opposed to trying to go back and fix chaos that gets created without an architecture and an infrastructure in place. So great. So let's look. There was several questions that came across, as we went through. I want to share a few of them with people. One that I thought was interesting, which is it's a tough answer because it could go in a lot of different directions, but it asks, where in enterprises where there are dedicated teams for network and security, where does the ownership lie for multi-cloud networking and security in the case of Aviatrix and Terraform? How would the DevOps and the network team collaborate, and what would the workflow be, right?
Yeah, so there are pros and cons to, multiple strategies here. And I think a lot of enterprises will choose to do this differently. Eventually, if the network teams have the capability to speak the same language as the application teams, I think that gives them the advantage of dictating the network architecture as well, right? And there might be other enterprises where they have potentially combined teams or a dedicated DevOps team, that takes over a network design and then actually works on infrastructure as code to deploy that out in the network. So it could be either or, and from my perspective, I think there are pros and cons to both strategies.
Okay, and you'll all notice that there's a quick poll that popped up. Please answer the few questions. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. It really helps us get some information about what's going on while we go through this Q&A. There was another question that actually is sort of specific to Aviatrix, but the question was, what is the connectivity between cloud providers? Is it over the internet? And I'll address that, but basically, yes, it can be across the internet. We're an overlay that allows those things to connect, but some customers will go across the internet and get approximately 5 gig of traffic, depending on what the services that cloud provider is providing. But other solutions are to actually have a dedicated underlay where maybe you're working with somebody like Equinix or Megaport who can give you an arm, say, into AWS and an arm into Azure. And maybe you have dedicated 10 gig links into there. And so now the overlay that we provide would take advantage of that 10 gig underlay, and you would get the full 10 gig or 50 gig or whatever it was you decided to connect between your cloud providers. So hopefully that's an answer for you. I'm just looking to see if there's, let's see.
And so just to quickly comment on that first question you asked about workflows.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're doing with our customers is we help the network team kind of build out a Terraform that is the base network that handles TGWs, route tables, VPCs, subnets, etc. And then the application teams, like let's say the customer that we actually demoed Aviatrix to today, we've got a Kubernetes Terraform that actually uses Terraform data queries to then attach to the network. So that way we can spin up workloads up and down without ripping the network backbone out from under the teams. And that's kind of how we've separated the duties. But one of the things about using Terraform is there's kind of the seams in your organization and your DevOps culture. You got to identify what works best for your org. The bigger you are, the more rigid I'm assuming it's going to be for you. But there's kind of this gray area where there's some overlap, and there's a lot of nice collaboration that happens when you speak a common language. But just kind of food for thought, something to think about is you can separate the network Terraform from the application workload Terraform and kind of get responsibility that way without, combining it all into one glob.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think that's a great construct, and I see that happening with a lot of my customers. We often call it like a producer-consumer model, right? Where there's producers of the things that they're experts at, and that kind of goes into the private module registry and the self-service story that we briefly touched on. But I agree completely, Justin.
Yeah, great, guys. It's good to have that experience and knowledge that you guys bring to the table. There was a question here, and Abhishek, maybe you can address this, but when exporting the Terraform code from Aviatrix, you have to do a Terraform import on those new resources, right? If I'm just running and in a plan apply, it would just create another instance of the resource. Is that correct?
That's right. So with import, you only import state. The advantage here is that you generate code as well. So so that's right. You need to import the state and then actually leverage the code to do an apply, which means once the state is there, Terraform now knows the item potency built into Terraform. Once it has the state, it knows that it doesn't need to duplicate the resources out there.
Yeah, but it saves you a ton of time instead of having to type out all those resources. So it's still pretty useful, especially if you're deploying across multiple environments.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see if there's any. Well, we're getting down to the wire in terms of time. So there was one question that was how to follow up if you want to do more. I mean, some of you may have raised your hand in the poll and said that you're interested in doing more deep dives, but we do have many things that we can do. Everything that you saw can be deployed really in an afternoon. So you can actually start deploy something in a test environment for yourself. We can help you. If you come to info@aviatrix.com via email, we can certainly get back to you and help you do that. There's a lot of information on docs.aviatrix.com. And of course, if you go to aviatrix.com, our homepage in the bottom right, there's a little chat guy. This is typically one of our solution architects. So these are technical guys that can answer technical questions or help you in the next steps. We also are doing customized architectural design sessions, and these can be scheduled as virtual or in person. We do this with a lot of our larger customers as they're moving through the process. And then I also encourage you to take a look at our ACE training, or Aviatrix Certified Engineering Multi-Cloud Network certifications. And this is both self-paced or instructor-led, so you can go through and choose which one you think is best for you. But this is a good next steps if you find that some of the things are very interesting. If your question didn't get answered today, please send it to info@aviatrix.com, and we'll be happy to follow up with you directly and drill in deeper. Anything else from you, Justin, Lynn, or Justin?
Nothing for me, Rod. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for me, thanks for having us on. It was awesome. And then, shameless plug, if you guys need help on the service side, observian.com. We're partnered with both Hashicorp and Aviatrix. So if you need help with the hands-on implementation, I'm more than happy to help.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you everybody for your time. Really appreciate you being on the webinar, and we look forward to meeting you in person at some point in time.